Hi there. It's October the 5th. We're continuing our journey through Paul's letter to the Colossians. We're in chapter 1, reading from verses 17 through to chapter 2 and verse 7. So Paul here is in the midst of a paean of praise to Jesus, that may be a hymn or a poem that was used by the church, and he's referring to this to describe the priority, the supremacy of Jesus in the whole story. Remember that perhaps the Colossians are being tempted to think of other means, other ways of accessing God, maybe through the Jewish tradition or even through secret knowledge. But Paul is making clear that it is Jesus who has the preeminence. He says he is at the top, he's the head, prior to everything else. In him, everything, he says, holds together. He is supreme, he says, the head, the source of life of the whole of his assembly, the church, his ecclesia, his called out ones, his gathered ones. He is the initiation of it all. He's the firstborn, the first fruits from the dead, so that in everything he could have the preeminence. And Paul says something exciting. He says, because in him, in Jesus, all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell. Now this would be not something that the Gnostics would understand, because they didn't see God as being able to have anything to do with physical flesh. But Paul is saying that there's something bodily happens through Jesus, and through Jesus he makes peace with God, reconciling all things. It says everything is reconciled in Jesus. Everything is given new meaning, a new purpose. Everything on earth and in heaven. So Jesus brings together earth and heaven, again in a way that the Gnostics would have denied, because they saw earth as being inherently evil. But Paul says no, in Jesus everything comes together. Paul then says what this has resulted in is us who were enemies of God have been made close to him, and we have been brought in this reconciliation into him through his flesh, through his death. And we've been brought into the very presence, before the very face of God. We've been made blameless. We've been made without guilt. This amazing inheritance that we now have because of what Jesus has done through his cross and through his resurrection. Paul, however, puts in the caveat that this assumes that we will continue in our faith, that there's a needing to live as in the way we've started, to continue faithful, to continue living in this hope of the good news we've heard. And this is the good news that is being proclaimed all throughout creation, and of which Paul himself has become a servant. It's interesting here he uses the Greek word diakonos rather than the other Greek word doulos, which is slave. Paul is saying, I have become a servant, a minister of this gospel, this good news. And now he says, I am rejoicing. I am so glad, because I'm seeing that something is going on in me. Now remember, Paul at this point is in prison in Rome, but he's rejoicing because he sees his sufferings. There's room, actually, Jesus has left room for Paul to participate in Jesus' sufferings, so that something is going on in Paul which allows others to access this amazing freedom, this amazing presence of God that he's accessed through Jesus, that because of his suffering, because of his being able to suffer for Jesus, others are also being able to access the good things that God has for them. And he says, I have become, again, a servant of the church, a diakonos, according to what God has called me to, because he gave me this commission. And he then refers, lastly, in chapter 1, to the mystery that God has laid down. Now remember, again, the Gnostics were big on mystery. They were saying there were hidden things that not everybody could access except by secret passwords. But remember, Paul is saying this is an open secret. This is an open mystery. Others have wanted to know it for generations, for ages, but now it's being made known. It's being made open. And the secret is this, that God wants to be in you, that you are to be glory bearers, that Christ in you is the hope of this glory. And remember that word glory in Hebrew, kavod, means the full gravity, the full weight, the full presence of God is carried in human beings because of what Jesus has done. This is God's intention. This is God's mystery. This is God's open secret. And this is what Paul is telling everyone about. He's teaching it. He's not keeping it to himself. He's letting folks know and instructing them in wisdom. This is the path. This is the key to wisdom. Jesus in us is the hope of glory. And Paul says that this is the aim that he has, that he wants to bring everyone to completion. He wants to bring everyone to maturity in this truth. And he says that with that, I'm working with all the energy that God has provided me. It's not my energy, it's not my effort, it's his energy at work in me. And then at the beginning of chapter 2, he refers to the struggle he's having here, not just for those in Colossae, this small town on the Lycus Valley, but also in Laodicea, which was nearby. There are other churches implicated in this. Maybe other churches were being impacted by the teachers who were coming in and teaching other things. But Paul wants them to be encouraged. He wants them to know the knowledge, the real mystery that he's talking about here, which is Jesus as Messiah, who rules. And it's in Jesus that all the treasures of hidden knowledge are found, not in secret passwords, not in the law, not in religious traditions, but it's in Jesus alone. And he's saying this because he doesn't want them to be misled. He doesn't want them to be led astray by others who are not really following Jesus' ways. And he says, even though I'm away from you, I'm actually watching over you. I'm being present with you in my spirit. It's as if I were with you now, making this appeal to them. And he says, for this reason, as you receive Jesus, as you started off with Jesus, continue with him, rooted, grounded, going deep into him. This is what Paul encourages these Colossian believers to follow, to stay rooted in Jesus, not to allow themselves to be taken off in any other direction. It's so important that as we journey, as we walk with Jesus, that we seek to go deeper into him, that we don't look for other secrets, that we don't look for other messages. The message is that it's Christ in us, which is the hope of glory. And therefore, even today, as we continue our walk with him, let's make him the one in whom the fullness of God dwells. Let's make him the focus and the centre of all our attention. Have a very good October the 5th.